The gunshot wound in her side had stopped bleeding hours ago, but Sarah knew that didn't mean she was going to survive this. She lay in the dust beside the overturned stagecoach, feeling the scorching California sun beating down on her face while vultures circled overhead, their shadows crossing her closed eyelids in rhythmic intervals that told her death was patient but inevitable. The robbery had happened so fast that morning. Sarah Brennan had been traveling from San Francisco to visit her aunt in Sacramento, carrying nothing more valuable than a few family photographs and the small inheritance her mother had left her when she passed 6 months prior. The money was sewn into the lining of her traveling bag, $300 that represented everything she had left in this world. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and completely alone after losing both parents within a year of each other. The stagecoach had been passing through the valley near Calistoga when the bandits struck. 4 men on horseback, their faces covered with red bandanas, had come thundering out of the hills with guns blazing. The driver had tried to outrun them, whipping the horses into a frenzied gallop, but a wheel hit a rock, and the whole coach had tilted violently before crashing onto its side. Sarah remembered screaming as she was thrown against the wall, then the door, then onto the hard ground as the coach splintered apart. The other passengers had scattered. She had seen the elderly banker running toward a cluster of rocks, and the young mother clutching her baby as she stumbled into the brush. But Sarah had been pinned under part of the coach door, her leg trapped, unable to move as the bandits approached. Their leader, a tall man with cold eyes visible above his bandana, had pointed his gun at her and demanded her valuables. Sarah had told them the truth. She had nothing but the bag with her mother's photographs and her inheritance. The bandit had grabbed the bag, ripped it open, and found the money sewn into the lining. He had laughed, a cruel sound that still echoed in her mind, and then he had shot her, just like that. No hesitation, no mercy. The bullet had torn through her side, and she had felt a burning pain so intense that she couldn't even scream. She could only gasp and clutch at the wound as blood poured between her fingers. The bandits had taken everything worth taking and ridden off, leaving her there to die. The other passengers had never come back. Maybe they were dead too. Maybe they had run far enough to save themselves. Either way, Sarah was alone, bleeding out in the California wilderness with nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing and the distant cry of those patient vultures. She didn't know how much time had passed. Hours, certainly. The sun had moved across the sky and the heat had become unbearable. Her throat was so dry she couldn't swallow. The wound in her side throbbed with every heartbeat, and she knew she was losing too much blood. She had tried to apply pressure, tried to stop the bleeding, but her strength had faded quickly. Now she just lay there, too weak to move, waiting for the end. That was when she heard the horse. At first, she thought it was the bandits coming back, and fear gave her a brief surge of energy. But then she heard a man's voice, low and concerned, speaking to his horse in gentle tones. The voice didn't sound cruel or dangerous. It sounded worried. "Easy now, copper. Easy. What is that over there?" Footsteps approached, boots crunching on the dry earth. Sarah tried to open her eyes, but the sunlight was too bright, and her eyelids felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. She felt a shadow fall over her face, blocking out that merciless sun, and then she heard the man's voice again, closer now. "Dear God, Miss, can you hear me?" She managed a small sound, something between a moan and a word. The man dropped to his knees beside her, and she felt strong, calloused hands touching her face, checking her pulse at her neck. His hands were gentle despite their roughness, and she could smell leather and sage and horse and something else, something clean like soap. "You are alive. Thank God you are alive, but you are shot. Hold on now, hold on. I am going to help you. Sarah forced her eyes open just a crack and saw a man's face above her. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. His face was tanned from the sun, with strong features and a jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. He wore a dusty brown hat pushed back on his head and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. There was a kindness in his eyes that made Sarah want to cry with relief. "The bandits," she managed to whisper. "They took everything. Don't talk now, save your strength. I am going to get you out of here." He stood and moved away briefly, and Sarah heard him talking to his horse again. Then he was back with a canteen, carefully lifting her head and bringing the water to her lips. She drank greedily, too thirsty to pace herself, and he let her drink until she coughed and had to stop. "Not too much at once," he said gently. "Your body needs to adjust. Let me look at that wound." His hands moved to her side, and Sarah cried out as he carefully pulled back the torn, blood-soaked fabric of her dress. She heard him take in a sharp breath. "The bullet went clean through. That is good. Means I will not have to dig it out. But you have lost a lot of blood, and this needs to be cleaned and bandaged right away. I am going to lift you onto my horse and take you to my ranch. It is not far, maybe 3 miles from here. Can you hold on that long?" Sarah tried to nod, but the movement made everything spin. The man seemed to understand because he was already moving, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. When he lifted her, Sarah did cry out, unable to stop herself. The pain in her side exploded like fire and dark spots danced across her vision. I know it hurts. I am sorry, just a little longer now." He carried her to his horse, a beautiful copper-colored gelding with a white blaze down its face. The man mounted first, then reached down for Sarah. She barely had the strength to lift her arms, but somehow he managed to pull her up in front of him, settling her sideways across his lap so that her head rested against his chest. One of his arms locked around her waist, holding her secure, while his other hand held the reins. "Hold on to me if you can," he said, and Sarah managed to clutch weakly at his shirt as he urged the horse into a gentle walk. Every step the horse took sent jolts of agony through Sarah's side, but the man held her steady, murmuring reassurance as they rode. She could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, strong and steady, and she focused on that rhythm to keep herself conscious. She had no idea who this man was or why he had stopped to help her, but he was saving her life, and that was all that mattered right now. The ride felt endless. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, only vaguely aware of the landscape passing by. She caught glimpses of rolling hills covered in golden grass, clusters of oak trees providing occasional shade, and in the distance, the purple-blue mountains that surrounded the valley. The sun continued its slow descent toward the western horizon, turning the sky shades of orange and pink. Finally, the horse turned onto a narrow dirt road, and Sarah felt the man's arm tighten around her. "Almost there. Stay with me now. Don't give up." Through her haze of pain, Sarah saw buildings appear. A small ranch house, weathered but sturdy with a covered porch, a barn beyond it, and several corrals with horses. The man guided his gelding right up to the porch and called out loudly, "Maria, Maria, I need help." A door opened and a woman emerged, middle-aged with gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a simple dress and apron, and her face was creased with concern as she took in the scene before her. "Senor Grant, what has happened?" Found her by the overturned stage near Calistoga. "She has been shot. Help me get her inside." Grant. So that was his name. Sarah filed that information away in some still functioning corner of her mind as the man dismounted, then carefully lowered her into the woman's waiting arms before jumping down himself and taking Sarah back from her. He carried her into the house, through a simple but clean front room and into a bedroom with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt. He laid her down as gently as possible, but Sarah still gasped with pain. Maria was already bustling around, gathering supplies while Grant lit several lamps to provide better light now that the sun was setting outside. "We need hot water, bandages, and whiskey," Grant said, his voice calm but urgent. "The wound goes clean through. Entry and exit. But it needs cleaning badly." "I will get everything," Maria said, hurrying from the room. Grant pulled up a chair beside the bed and sat down, his hand finding Sarah's and squeezing gently. "You are going to be all right. Maria has helped me tend injured animals plenty of times, and I learned field medicine during my time in the cavalry. We are going to get you fixed up." Sarah wanted to thank him, wanted to tell him how grateful she was, but she couldn't form the words. Instead, she just held onto his hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. Maria returned quickly with a basin of steaming water, clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey, and what looked like needle and thread. Grant released Sarah's hand reluctantly and rolled up his sleeves. "This is going to hurt," he said, meeting Sarah's eyes with that steady, kind gaze. "I will not lie to you about that, but I need to clean the wound and stitch it closed. Maria, hold her down. She is going to fight." Sarah wanted to protest that she would stay still, that she could handle it, but when Grant poured the whiskey directly into the wound, she screamed. The pain was beyond anything she had ever experienced, white-hot and all-consuming. She tried to thrash, but Maria's surprisingly strong hands held her shoulders down while Grant worked quickly, washing the wound with the hot water and cloth, cleaning away blood and dirt and gunpowder. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. She bit her lips so hard she tasted blood, trying not to scream again, but when Grant started stitching the entry wound in her side, she couldn't help it. She sobbed openly, her whole body shaking with the pain. "Almost done, almost done," Grant kept saying, his voice tight with concentration. "Just a few more. You are doing so well, just hold on." He stitched the exit wound in her back next, and Sarah thought she might pass out from the pain, but somehow she stayed conscious through it all. Finally, Grant tied off the last stitch and sat back, his own hands shaking slightly. "There, it is done. Maria, bandage her up." Maria wrapped clean strips of cloth around Sarah's torso, binding the wound securely. Then she pulled a light blanket over Sarah, tucking it around her carefully. "She needs rest now, and water and food when she can keep it down," Maria said softly. "I will make some broth." "Thank you, Maria." Grant's voice was hoarse with exhaustion. He looked down at Sarah, brushing a strand of sweat-dampened hair from her face. "The worst is over. You can rest now. You are safe here." Sarah's eyes were already closing. The pain had become a dull, throbbing ache rather than the sharp agony of before, and the exhaustion that had been building for hours finally crashed over her like a wave. She felt Grant's hand rest gently on her shoulder, felt the comfort of that touch, and then she was falling into darkness, a deep and dreamless sleep. When Sarah woke, she had no idea how much time had passed. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp turned low on a table beside the bed. She lay very still, taking inventory of her body. The pain in her side was still there, but it was manageable, a constant ache rather than stabbing agony. Her mouth was dry and her head felt fuzzy, but she was alive. She was actually alive. She turned her head slightly and saw him. Grant was sitting in the chair beside her bed, his head tipped back against the wall, eyes closed. He had removed his hat and his dark hair was tousled. Even in sleep, there was something solid and dependable about him, and Sarah found herself studying his face. He had a good face, she decided. Strong and honest, with small lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though she hadn't seen him smile yet. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened. They focused on her immediately, and he sat up straight. "You are awake. How do you feel?" "Like I was shot," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse, "but alive, thanks to you." A small smile crossed his face, softening his features. "Well, that is better than the alternative. Are you thirsty? Here, let me help you." He reached for a cup of water on the bedside table and carefully slipped his hand behind her head, lifting her just enough to drink without straining her wound. The water was cool and sweet, and Sarah drank slowly this time, remembering his earlier warning. When she finished, he lowered her head back to the pillow and set the cup aside. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and Sarah saw concern and curiosity mixed in his expression. "I do not even know your name," he said softly. "What is your name, Miss Sarah?" she whispered. "Sarah Brennan." "Sarah." He said it like he was testing how it felt, and Sarah thought she had never heard her name sound quite like that before, so gentle and careful. "I am Grant. Grant Thornton. This is my ranch, and that was Maria you met earlier. She cooks and keeps house for me." "You are safe here, Sarah. No one is going to hurt you." "The stagecoach," Sarah said, memories flooding back. "The robbery. There were others. Did anyone else survive?" "I do not know. I only found you, but I will ride to town tomorrow and make a report to the sheriff." "Maybe the others made it to safety." He paused. "Can you tell me what happened, if it is not too difficult?" Sarah closed her eyes, but she told him everything. The suddenness of the attack, the crash, being trapped and shot, watching the bandits ride away with her inheritance. Grant listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with anger as she spoke. "4 men, you said, with red bandanas?" "Yes. Their leader was tall with cold eyes. He shot me without even thinking about it, like I was nothing." Grant's jaw tightened. "That sounds like the Dalton gang." "They have been terrorizing stages in this area for the past 2 months. The sheriff has been trying to track them down, but they always seem to vanish into the hills." He looked at her, his eyes softening again. "I am sorry they took your inheritance, and I am sorry they hurt you. But I promise you, Sarah Brennan, you are going to recover. I will make sure of that." There was something in his voice, a fierce protectiveness that made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion. This man, this stranger who had every reason to ride past a dying woman and save himself the trouble, had instead stopped and saved her life. He had brought her to his home, tended her wounds, and was now sitting vigil at her bedside. She didn't understand it, but she was grateful beyond words. "Why did you help me?" she whispered. "You didn't have to stop." Grant looked surprised by the question. "How could I not? You needed help. What kind of man would I be if I just rode past and left you there to die?" He shook his head. "My mother raised me better than that. She always said that the measure of a person is not what they do when people are watching, but what they do when no one is. I could not have lived with myself if I had left you." "Your mother sounds like a good woman." "She was. She passed 3 years ago, fever. My father went 2 years before that, thrown from a horse. This was their ranch. Now it is mine." A shadow crossed his face. "Sometimes it feels too big for just one man, but I do my best to keep it running the way they would have wanted. You are alone here, mostly." "Maria comes in daily to help, and I have a couple of ranch hands who work the property, but they live in town. It is just me in the house." He realized how that might sound and quickly added, "But Maria will be here first thing in the morning, and she will help take care of you. You do not need to worry. Everything is proper." Sarah almost laughed, but it hurt too much. "Mr. Thornton, you saved my life. I think propriety is the least of my concerns right now. Grant, he said, please just call me Grant, and I suppose you have a point. He stood up, stretching his back. You should rest more. Maria made some broth, and I will bring you some if you think you can eat. Maybe a little, Sarah admitted. The mention of food made her realize how hungry she was despite the pain. Grant left the room and returned a few minutes later with a bowl of steaming broth that smelled of chicken and herbs. He helped her sit up slightly, propping pillows behind her, and then he fed her slowly, spoonful by spoonful. It should have been embarrassing being fed like a child, but Sarah was too weak to manage it herself, and too grateful for the food to care. The broth was delicious, warming her from the inside out, and she managed to eat almost half the bowl before her stomach protested. Grant set the bowl aside and helped her lie back down. That is good. You need to build your strength back up. Tomorrow we will try some solid food. He pulled the blanket up around her again. I will be right here if you need anything. Just call out. You don't have to stay, Sarah said, even though the thought of being alone frightened her. I want to. I need to make sure you do not develop a fever or take a turn for the worse. Besides, I would not be able to sleep anyway, worrying about you. He settled back into the chair. Rest now, Sarah. You are safe. And despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the strangeness of being in an unfamiliar place with a man she had just met, Sarah believed him. She closed her eyes and let herself drift back to sleep, comforted by the knowledge that Grant Thornton was watching over her. The next few days passed in a blur of pain and healing. Sarah woke and slept in irregular cycles, sometimes finding Grant sitting beside her, sometimes finding Maria checking her bandages and administering medicine. The fever Grant had worried about did come, sending her into delirium for a full day and night where she thrashed and mumbled and saw shadows on the walls that looked like bandits with guns. Through it all, Grant stayed. She learned later that he had barely left her side, bathing her face with cool cloths when the fever spiked, holding her down gently when she tried to pull at her stitches in her delirium, and murmuring constant reassurance that she was safe, that she would be all right, that he was there. When the fever finally broke, Sarah woke to find herself weak as a kitten but clear-headed for the first time since the shooting. Maria was there, changing her bandages with practiced efficiency while Grant stood in the doorway watching. The wound is healing well, Maria announced with satisfaction. No infection, see? The stitches hold clean. She will have a scar, but she will live. Thank you, Maria, Grant said, relief evident in his voice. Thank you for everything. Maria waved him off. I did little. It was you who saved her, Senor Grant. You who brought her here, you who cleaned and stitched the wound, you who sat with her through the fever. I only helped. She finished tying off the fresh bandage and smiled down at Sarah. You are a lucky woman to have been found by such a good man. Sarah looked past Maria to where Grant stood, and their eyes met. In that moment, something passed between them, something Sarah couldn't quite name but felt all the way to her core. It was more than gratitude, more than relief. It was connection, recognition, like her soul had identified something kindred in his. Grant cleared his throat and looked away first. I should go check on the horses. Maria, make sure she eats something. He left quickly, and Maria chuckled softly as she helped Sarah sit up. That man, she said, shaking her head. 3 years I have worked for him, and never have I seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you. It is good. He has been alone too long. I barely know him, Sarah protested, though her cheeks felt warm. The heart does not always need time. Sometimes it just knows. Maria brought over a tray with toast and eggs and more of that good broth. Now eat. You need your strength if you are going to keep that man on his toes. Sarah did eat, managing more solid food than she had since the shooting. After Maria left, Sarah was alone in the room for the first time with enough clarity to really look around. It was a simple space, furnished with the bed, a dresser, a wardrobe, and a small table with a wash basin. The quilt covering her was beautiful, a pattern of interlocking rings in blues and greens that looked handmade. The walls were bare except for one framed photograph of a stern-looking man and a kind-faced woman who Sarah guessed were Grant's parents. This was probably their room once, she realized. Grant had given her his parents' room, the best room in the house. The thought made her chest tighten with emotion. She must have dozed off again because when she woke, it was late afternoon and Grant was back in his chair, reading a book. He noticed her eyes open and set the book aside. "How are you feeling?" "Better, clearer, weak but better." Sarah hesitated, then asked, "Did you go to town?" "To report to the sheriff." "I did, 2 days ago when your fever broke long enough for me to leave you in Maria's care. The sheriff had already heard about the robbery. The driver made it to safety and reported it. The other passengers are alive too. They all scattered when the shooting started and made it to town eventually. The sheriff and a posse went out looking for you, but by the time they got there, you were gone. They thought you were dead and that the bandits had taken your body." "So I am a ghost," Sarah said with a weak smile. "A very alive ghost." Grant leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The sheriff will want to talk to you when you are well enough. Get your description of the bandits and what they took, but there is no rush. That can wait until you are stronger." "What about my things? Did they find anything at the scene?" Grant's expression turned sympathetic. "Not much. The stagecoach was pretty badly damaged. They recovered some luggage, but it had all been rifled through. Nothing of value left. I am sorry, Sarah. Your mother's photographs, your money, it is all gone." Sarah had known it was true, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a blow. Those photographs had been the last pieces of her mother she had left. The money had been her hope for a fresh start. Now she had nothing. She was penniless, homeless, and entirely dependent on the charity of a man she had known for less than a week. "Hey," Grant said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "It is going to be all right. You are alive, and that is what matters. The rest we can figure out." "How?" Sarah heard the desperation in her own voice. "I have nothing, Grant. No money, no belongings, nowhere to go. My aunt in Sacramento might take me in, but I have no way to get there, and even if I did, she is elderly and barely has enough to support herself. I cannot be a burden to her." "You will stay here," Grant said simply, "until you are fully healed and we figure out what comes next. I have plenty of room, and Maria can use the help once you are recovered. She has been after me for months to hire someone to help with the house and the chickens and the garden. You could work here, earn money, save up for whatever you want to do next. You have already done so much. And I am offering to do more. Not out of pity, Sarah. You seem like a good person who has had terrible luck. Let me help you turn that luck around." His hand squeezed hers gently. "Besides, I could use the company. This house gets mighty quiet with just me in it." Sarah looked at him, this kind, strong man who had saved her life, and was now offering to save it again in a different way. She knew she should feel hesitant, should worry about propriety and what people might think, but all she felt was grateful and something else, something warm and hopeful that she was almost afraid to examine too closely. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you, Grant. I will stay and help however I can. I promise I will not be a burden." "You could never be a burden." He smiled at her, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face, lighting up those whiskey-colored eyes. "Welcome to Thornton Ranch, Sarah Brennan. I think this is the beginning of something good." Over the following week, Sarah's strength returned gradually. Grant helped her take her first steps around the room, his arm solid around her waist as she wobbled on legs that felt like jelly. Maria brought her regular meals, each one a little larger than the last, and Sarah felt herself healing not just physically, but in some deeper way she hadn't expected. Being at the ranch was peaceful. She could hear the sounds of daily life through her window, horses whinnying, cattle lowing in the distance, Grant calling instructions to his ranch hands. In the evenings, Grant would bring his dinner into her room and they would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that Grant was 26 years old, that he had inherited the ranch when his parents died, and that he had worked hard to keep it running despite being alone. He had served briefly in the cavalry, which was where he had learned field medicine, but had left after his father died to come home and run the ranch. He loved horses, had a dry sense of humor that caught Sarah off guard and made her laugh, and had dreams of expanding the ranch someday, maybe breeding horses instead of just raising cattle. Grant learned that Sarah was 22, that she had grown up in San Francisco as the daughter of a shopkeeper, and that she had lost both her parents within a year, her father to a heart condition, and her mother to grief and illness shortly after. She had been trained in keeping books and accounts for her father's shop, was surprisingly well-read thanks to a neighbor who had lent her novels, and had been heading to Sacramento in hopes of starting fresh when the robbery happened. "So you are good with numbers?" Grant asked one evening, his eyes lighting up with interest. "I've been keeping the ranch books myself, but I will be honest, math was never my strong suit. I get it done, but it takes me forever and I am never confident I did it right." "I could help with that," Sarah offered. "Once I am up and about. I used to do all the accounting for my father's shop." "That would be amazing. See, I told you that you would not be a burden. You are already making yourself indispensable," he grinned at her. "At this rate, I might never let you leave." He said it jokingly, but something in Sarah's heart fluttered at the thought. The idea of staying here, of making a life at this peaceful ranch with this good man, was becoming more appealing every day. She told herself it was just because she was vulnerable, because Grant had saved her and she was naturally feeling attached to him. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was falling for him. For his kindness and his strength, for the way he looked at her like she mattered, for his easy laugh and his gentle hands, and the way he made her feel safe for the first time since her parents had died. It was foolish, she knew. She barely knew him. But the heart, as Maria had said, did not always need time. The question was whether Grant felt the same way, or whether his care for her was simply that of a decent man helping someone in need. Sarah got her answer 2 weeks after she had arrived at the ranch. She was finally well enough to leave the bedroom, though she still tired easily and her side ached if she moved wrong. Maria had helped her dress in one of her own dresses, altered to fit Sarah's slighter frame, and Sarah had ventured out into the main house. The front room was cozy, with worn but comfortable furniture, a stone fireplace and windows that let in beautiful afternoon light. There was a small dining table in one corner and a kitchen area beyond that. The walls held more photographs of Grant's parents and some landscape paintings that Sarah suspected his mother had done. Sarah made her way slowly to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The view took her breath away. The ranch stretched out before her, golden hills rolling away toward distant mountains, oak trees providing shade in clusters, and horses grazing in the nearest corral. The sky was a brilliant blue, dotted with white clouds, and the air smelled of grass and earth and freedom. She heard footsteps and turned to see Grant coming from the barn, leading Copper. He stopped when he saw her, a huge smile breaking across his face. "Sarah, you are up. Should you be out here? Are you all right?" "I am fine. I needed to see the sun, breathe fresh air." "I was going crazy in that room." She smiled at him. Your ranch is beautiful, Grant. Thank you. My parents built it from nothing, spent 30 years turning it into what it is. He tied Copper to the porch rail and came up the steps to stand beside her. I am glad you are well enough to see it properly. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the land. Then Grant spoke, his voice quieter than before. Sarah, I have been thinking. You said you would stay and help around the ranch, and I want you to know that I meant what I said. You are welcome here for as long as you want to stay. But I also want you to know that you do not have to feel obligated. If you want to move on, go to your aunt or try somewhere new, I will help you do that. I will give you money for travel, letters of reference, whatever you need. You do not owe me anything. Sarah turned to look at him, confused by the sudden seriousness in his tone. I thought you wanted me to stay and help. I do, I really do, but I do not want you to stay out of obligation or because you feel trapped. I want you to stay because you want to, because you choose to, not because you think you have no other option. He met her eyes, and Sarah saw something vulnerable in his expression. I need you to know that you have choices, Sarah. You are not stuck here. What if I want to be? The words came out before Sarah could stop them, honest and raw. What if I want to stay not because I have to, but because this is the first place that has felt like home since my parents died? Grant stared at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. Do you mean that? I do. Grant, you saved my life. But it is more than that. Being here, getting to know you, it feels right. It feels like maybe this is where I am supposed to be. She took a breath, gathering her courage. Unless you want me to go. If I am overstaying my welcome or making things difficult, I will understand. No, Grant said quickly, almost fiercely. No, Sarah, that is not it at all. I want you to stay. More than I can probably say without sounding like a fool. He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. The truth is, I started falling for you the moment I saw you lying there in the dust, fighting to stay alive. You were so brave, so strong. And getting to know you these past 2 weeks has only made it worse. I wake up thinking about you. I go to sleep thinking about you. You are the last thing on my mind at night and the first thing in the morning. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Grant, I know it is too soon. I know you probably do not feel the same way. You have been through trauma and you are vulnerable, and I do not want to take advantage of that. But I needed you to know that if you stay, it is not just as a hired hand or a friend. I want more than that, Sarah. I want to court you properly if you will let me. I want to see if this thing between us is real and lasting. And if it is, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I want to build a life with you. Sarah couldn't speak. Couldn't find the words for the overwhelming emotion flooding through her. So instead, she reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I feel the same way, she whispered. I have been trying to tell myself it was just gratitude or that I was confused because you saved me. But it is more than that. You make me feel safe and valued and hopeful for the first time in so long. When I think about the future now, I see you in it. I see this ranch, this life. I see home. Grant's hand tightened around hers, and then he was stepping closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. Can I kiss you? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Please, Sarah breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Sarah did not want to change her mind. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. His hand on her cheek was warm, his lips soft, and Sarah felt like something inside her that had been broken was suddenly knitting back together. This was right. This was real. This was home. When they pulled apart, Grant rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. I am going to do this right, he said. I am going to court you properly, take you on picnics, bring you flowers, make you dinner. I want everyone to know that you are special to me, that you matter. And when enough time has passed that we are both sure, I am going to ask you to marry me, Sarah Brennan. I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "I think I would like that very much," Sarah said, smiling through the tears that were sliding down her cheeks. "I think I would like that more than anything." And there on the porch of Thornton Ranch, with the California sun shining down and the horses grazing peacefully in the corral, Sarah felt her new life truly beginning. The old Sarah, the one who had been shot and left for dead, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had survived and was ready to live again, ready to love again. Grant kissed her once more, soft and lingering, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she was meant to be. The next several weeks were the happiest Sarah had known in years. She healed fully, the wound in her side becoming just a scar that ached only when the weather changed. She started helping Maria around the house, learning to cook the way Maria did with herbs and spices that made even simple dishes delicious. She took over the ranch books, organizing Grant's scattered records, and discovering that he was actually doing better financially than he had thought. She tended the garden, fed the chickens, and learned the names and personalities of all the horses. And through it all, Grant courted her. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, making her laugh when he admitted he had no idea what half of them were called but thought they were pretty. He took her on rides around the property, showing her the creek that ran through the back acres, the old oak tree his father had proposed to his mother under, the highest point on the ranch where you could see for miles. He cooked dinner for her one evening when Maria was visiting her sister, burning the chicken so badly they ended up eating bread and cheese and laughing until their sides hurt. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories and dreams. Grant told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of breeding horses that would be known throughout California for their strength and spirit. Sarah told him about her childhood in San Francisco, about helping her father in his shop and learning to love numbers and order in the chaos of bookkeeping. They also talked about harder things. Grant told her about the loneliness of losing both parents and running the ranch alone, about the nights when the house felt too empty, and he wondered if he would spend his whole life that way. Sarah told him about watching her mother waste away from grief after her father died, about the guilt she felt that she had not been enough to keep her mother fighting. "It was not your fault," Grant said firmly, holding her as they sat together on the porch swing he had hung from the ceiling. "Grief can be like an illness. It consumes people sometimes, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop it. Your mother loved you, Sarah, never doubt that. I know, but I still wonder sometimes if I could have done more, been more." Sarah leaned into his warmth, grateful for his solid presence. "Losing them both so close together made me feel untethered, like I had no place in the world anymore. You have a place now, right here." Grant kissed the top of her head. "I know it has only been a couple of months, but I cannot imagine this ranch without you anymore. You have made it come alive again, made it feel like a home instead of just a place I work and sleep." Sarah tilted her head up to look at him. "You have given me back my life, Grant, literally and figuratively. I was so lost before the robbery, and I know that sounds strange, that something so terrible could lead to something so good, but I cannot regret it if it brought me to you." "I will always regret that you were hurt," Grant said seriously, "but I will be grateful every day that I found you in time." They kissed, and it felt as natural as breathing now. Sarah had never felt so cherished, so valued. Grant treated her like she was precious, like her thoughts and feelings and dreams mattered. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions, listened when she suggested changes to how he was organizing his breeding program, and praised her when she saved him significant money by renegotiating his feed contract with the supplier in town. Maria watched them with knowing eyes and satisfaction. "I told you," she said to Sarah one afternoon while they were baking bread together. "The heart knows. And that man, his heart knew from the moment he saw you that you were special. Now his head has caught up. You think it is too fast?" Sarah asked, voicing the worry that sometimes kept her awake at night. "People will talk. They will say I am taking advantage of his kindness, or that he is rushing into something with a woman he barely knows. People will always talk. It is what they do." Maria shaped dough with practiced hands. "But you and Senor Grant, you know the truth. You know what you feel, the rest is just noise. Besides," she added with a smile, "anyone who sees you two together can tell this is real. The way he looks at you, the way you look at him, it is love, pure and simple. Do not let the opinions of others steal your happiness." Sarah took the advice to heart. When she and Grant went to town together for the first time, she held her head high despite the stares and whispers. Grant introduced her to everyone they met as Miss Sarah Brennan, who was helping run his ranch, and the way he said it made clear that she was important to him. Some people were kind, welcoming Sarah and expressing relief that she had survived the robbery. Others were more judgmental, their expressions suggesting they thought improper things were happening at Thornton Ranch. Grant did not seem to notice or care about the latter group. He kept Sarah close, his hand at her back, his pride in her evident. When they stopped at the general store for supplies, the owner's wife made a pointed comment about young women living alone with unmarried men. Grant looked at the woman coolly. "Mrs. Henderson, Miss Brennan nearly died in that robbery. She lost everything. I offered her honest work and a safe place to recover. If you see something improper in that, then perhaps the problem is not with me or Miss Brennan but with your own mind. Now, do we need to take our business elsewhere, or are you going to sell us the supplies we came for, Mrs.?" Henderson had flustered and backed down, ringing up their purchases without another word. Once they were outside, Sarah had laughed and squeezed Grant's arm. "My hero," she teased, "defending my honor against nosy shopkeepers. Always," Grant said, completely serious. "I will not let anyone make you feel small or ashamed, Sarah. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You are good and kind and strong, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool." It was moments like that which made Sarah fall deeper in love with him. He was not just kind when it was easy. He was principled even when it was difficult. He stood up for what was right, for the people he cared about, and he did it without seeking praise or recognition. 3 months after Sarah had arrived at the ranch, Grant took her up to that highest point on the property, the place where you could see for miles. They rode together, Sarah on a gentle mare named Daisy that Grant had chosen specifically for her, and Grant on Copper. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. They dismounted at the top of the hill, and Grant spread out a blanket he had brought in his saddlebag. They sat together, looking out at the view, and Sarah felt a sense of peace so profound it almost brought tears to her eyes. "I love it here," she said softly. "I never knew a place could feel so much like home." "It is home," Grant said. "Your home, if you want it to be, permanently." Sarah turned to look at him and found him pulling something from his pocket. It was a small box, worn leather that looked like it had seen many years. Grant opened it, and inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small ruby set in the center. "This was my mother's," Grant said, his voice thick with emotion. "My father gave it to her when he proposed, right here on this spot. She wore it every day until she died, and then my father kept it with him always until he passed. I have been carrying it around for weeks now, waiting for the right moment." He took a breath. "Sarah Brennan, I know we have not known each other long by most people's standards, But I know my heart, and I know it belongs to you. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. You are smart and strong and kind. You make me laugh, you make me think, you make me want to be better. I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else. Will you marry me? Will you make this ranch our home, build a future with me, and let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me? Sarah could not speak past the lump in her throat. She was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. She nodded frantically, unable to find her voice. "Is that a yes?" Grant asked, hope and love shining in his eyes. "Yes," Sarah finally managed to choke out. "Yes, Grant, of course yes. I love you so much." Grant slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he was pulling her into his arms, kissing her with a passion and joy that made Sarah's head spin. They held each other as the sun set behind them, two people who had found each other against all odds and were choosing to build a life together. "I will make you happy," Grant promised, his voice fierce. "I swear to you, Sarah, I will spend every day trying to make you as happy as you make me." "You already do," Sarah said, cupping his face in her hands. "You already do, Grant. Just by being you, by loving me, by giving me a place to belong. That is all I need." They stayed on that hilltop until the stars came out, talking about their future. They decided to get married quickly, within the month if they could arrange it. They did not want a big wedding, just something simple with a few friends and neighbors. They talked about how they would run the ranch together, how Sarah would handle the business side while Grant managed the livestock and land. They talked about children someday, about growing old together, about all the years they would have to love and support each other. When they finally rode back to the ranch house, it was full dark, and Maria had long since left for the evening. Grant helped Sarah down from her horse and pulled her close. "I cannot wait to call you my wife," he said, kissing her softly. "I cannot wait to call you my husband," Sarah replied, the word filling her with warmth and joy. They went inside together, and for the first time since her parents had died, Sarah felt truly at home. She had found her place, her person, her future. And it had all started with the worst day of her life turning into the beginning of the best. The wedding took place 4 weeks later at the small church in Calistoga. It was a simple affair, just as they had wanted. Maria stood up for Sarah, and one of Grant's ranch hands, a young man named Tom, stood up for Grant. The priest was kind, his sermon about love and commitment and building a life together touching Sarah's heart. She wore a simple white dress that Maria had helped her sew, and Grant wore his best suit, looking more handsome than Sarah had ever seen him. When they exchanged vows, Sarah's voice was clear and sure. She promised to love Grant, to honor him, to stand by his side through whatever came. Grant's vows were just as heartfelt, his voice catching as he promised to cherish her, protect her, and build a life with her that would make them both happy. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife and told Grant he could kiss his bride, Grant did so with enthusiasm, dipping Sarah back dramatically and making the small gathered crowd laugh and cheer. Sarah laughed too, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The celebration afterward at the ranch was small but joyful. Maria had prepared a feast, and the few neighbors and friends who had come ate and drank and toasted the new couple. Even some of the people who had been judgmental initially seemed won over by the obvious love between Grant and Sarah. When the last guest had left and the sun was setting, Grant swept Sarah up in his arms, making her squeal with surprise. "What are you doing, carrying my wife over the threshold?" Grant said, grinning. "It is tradition." He carried her into the house and through to the bedroom, the same room where he had nursed her back to health months before. But now it was different. Now it was their room, the beginning of their life together as husband and wife. Grant set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Sarah said honestly. "Grant, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love. I never dreamed I could have this." "We have given each other everything," Grant corrected. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, Sarah. I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how lonely until you showed me what it felt like to have someone who truly understood me, who saw me for who I am and loved me anyway." "I will always love you," Sarah promised. "For the rest of my life and beyond." They came together then, expressing in touch and kiss and whispered words what they felt in their hearts. Sarah had never felt so cherished, so loved, so completely safe. Grant was gentle and passionate, caring and reverent, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Sarah knew she had found her forever. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Grant's breeding program for horses took off, and within 3 years, Thornton Ranch was known throughout California for producing some of the finest horses in the state. Sarah's management of the books and business side ensured they made smart decisions, grew steadily, and built a solid financial foundation. They faced challenges, of course. There were droughts that made water scarce and feed expensive. There were harsh winters where they lost livestock. There were difficult births and sick animals and equipment that broke down at the worst possible times. But they faced it all together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating together during the good. A year and a half after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy with Grant's dark hair and Sarah's green eyes. They named him Thomas Grant Thornton, and he was perfect. Grant cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotion at the tiny life they had created together. "He is beautiful," Grant whispered, kissing Sarah's sweat-dampened forehead. "You are amazing. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for giving me this gift, this family." "We made him together," Sarah said, exhausted but happy as she watched her husband cradle their son. "He is ours, Grant, the first of many, I hope." And there were more. 2 years later, they welcomed twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who were identical except for a small birthmark on Emma's left shoulder. The girls were spirited and adventurous, keeping Sarah and Grant constantly on their toes. Grant proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching his children to ride almost before they could walk and telling them stories every night before bed. Sarah watched her family grow with a joy she had never imagined possible. Sometimes, when she was working in the garden or doing the books while her children played nearby, she would think back to that day in the dust, bleeding out and waiting to die. She would think about how far she had come, how that terrible moment had led to this beautiful life. Maria, who had become like family over the years, often watched the children when Sarah and Grant needed time alone. She had been there for every birth, had taught the children their first words in Spanish, and had become the grandmother they never would have had otherwise. She was in her 60s now, her hair completely gray, but she was still strong and still came to the ranch every day. "Look at this family you have built," Maria said one afternoon as they watched Thomas, now 5, teaching his younger sisters how to feed the chickens. From such tragedy came such blessing. This is the way of life sometimes. The darkest moments lead to the brightest light. "I am grateful every day," Sarah said, "for all of it, even the hard parts because they brought me here." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grant took Sarah back up to that hilltop where he had proposed. The children were with Maria, and they had the whole afternoon to themselves. They sat on the same spot, older now but still deeply in love, and looked out at the view. "Do you remember when I asked you to marry me here?" Grant asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Of course. I remember everything about that day. I remember thinking that I had never been so happy that I could not imagine being happier. Sarah leaned into him. I was wrong, though. I am happier now. Every year with you, every moment of our life together has made me happier than the last. I feel the same way. When I think about finding you that day, about how easily I could have taken a different route or left a few minutes earlier or later and never seen you, it terrifies me. My whole life depended on that one moment, that one decision to take that particular road at that particular time. Maybe it was fate, Sarah suggested. Maybe we were always meant to find each other. Maybe, Grant agreed. All I know is that I am grateful. Grateful for every day I get with you, for our children, for this life we have built. You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Thornton. You always will be. They kissed, and it still felt like coming home. 10 years of marriage had not dimmed their passion or their love. If anything, it had deepened it, adding layers of respect and partnership and shared history to the foundation of attraction and affection. As they rode back down the hill, Sarah looked at the ranch spread out below them. Their ranch. Their home. She could see the house, larger now with additions Grant had built as their family grew. She could see the barn and corrals, the pastures dotted with horses and cattle, the garden lush and green. She could see the life they had created together, built from nothing but love and determination and faith in each other. That night, as they tucked their children into bed, Sarah stood in the doorway of each room, watching them sleep. Thomas, so serious and thoughtful, already showing signs of inheriting his father's love for horses. Emma, bold and fearless, always the first to try something new. Grace, gentler but equally stubborn, with a talent for drawing that amazed them both. These were her children, her family, her legacy. Grant came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder as they watched Grace sleep. I love our life, he murmured. I love you and our children and everything we have built together. I could not have imagined any of this that day I found you by the stagecoach, but now I cannot imagine anything else. Neither can I, Sarah said softly. This is everything I ever wanted, Grant. Everything and more. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays and the steady rhythm of ranch life. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and talents. Thomas became an excellent horseman, just like his father, and by the time he was 15, he was helping run the breeding program. Emma developed a head for business like her mother, and she could negotiate prices with suppliers in a way that impressed even Sarah. Grace found her calling in art, painting beautiful landscapes that they hung throughout the house. When Thomas was 18, he told his parents that he wanted to stay on the ranch, to learn everything he could and eventually take over the business. Grant and Sarah were thrilled, seeing their legacy continue through their son. Emma, meanwhile, announced that she wanted to go to San Francisco to attend a women's college, to learn more about business and economics. It was hard to let her go, but Sarah and Grant supported her dreams, knowing their daughter would do great things. Grace fell in love at 17 with a young man from town, the son of the local doctor. He was kind and intelligent, and he clearly adored Grace. When he asked Grant for permission to court her, Grant gave it gladly, though Sarah teased him about how seriously he had grilled the poor young man first. I want to make sure he is good enough for our daughter, Grant protested. Is that so wrong? He will never be good enough in your eyes, Sarah laughed. No man could be, but he is a good man, Grant. He will make her happy. And he did. They married when Grace was 19, a beautiful ceremony that had Sarah crying throughout. Grant walked Grace down the aisle with tears streaming down his own face, and when he placed Grace's hand in her new husband's, he whispered something that made both the young couple and Sarah weep anew. Later, Sarah asked Grant what he had said. "I told him that he was receiving the most precious gift in the world, and that if he ever did anything to harm her or make her unhappy, he would answer to me," Grant said. "And then I told him that I trusted him, that I could see he loved her truly, and that I was grateful to have him as part of our family." Emma graduated from college at 21 and returned to Calistoga to work with Sarah on expanding the ranch's business interests. She had ideas about starting a horse training school, about breeding not just for cattle work but for show and sport, and Grant and Sarah gave her the freedom to pursue those ideas. Within a few years, Thornton Ranch had become one of the most respected names in California horse breeding and training. As Sarah and Grant entered their 40s, they watched their children build lives of their own while remaining close to the family. Thomas married a sweet young woman from a neighboring ranch and gave them their first grandchild, a baby girl they named Sarah. Grace and her husband had twin boys, keeping up the family tradition, it seemed, of multiples. Emma, ever independent, declared she was in no hurry to marry, preferring to focus on building the business. Maria, now in her 80s, finally retired from daily work at the ranch, though she still visited often, delighting in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren that called her abuela. Grant and Sarah hired several young people to help run the house and ranch, always remembering how Maria had given them both their start. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Grant and Sarah's children threw them a huge party. Friends and neighbors from all over the county came to celebrate, and the ranch was filled with music and laughter and love. Sarah wore a beautiful dress that Emma had insisted on buying her from San Francisco, and Grant wore a new suit, though he complained about the tie. 25 years, Grant said in his speech, his arm around Sarah as they stood on the porch looking out at the crowd. 25 years ago, I married the woman who saved my life. I know people think I saved hers, and I suppose in the physical sense I did. But Sarah saved me in every way that mattered. She gave me purpose and partnership and love. She gave me a family and a home that feels full instead of empty. She gave me everything. Sarah was crying, of course, as she always did when Grant made speeches like this. "And he gave me back my life," she said, her voice wavering. "When I thought I had lost everything, when I was literally dying in the dust, Grant found me. He saved me, healed me, and loved me. He gave me a reason to live again, to hope again, to dream again. These past 25 years have been the happiest of my life, and I look forward to 25 more." The crowd cheered, and their children came up to hug them, and Sarah thought her heart might burst from happiness. This was her life. This beautiful, full, joyful life that had started in the darkest moment, and had bloomed into something she never could have imagined. As they grew older, Sarah and Grant began to step back from the daily running of the ranch, trusting Thomas and Emma to handle more of the responsibilities. They traveled a bit, taking trips to San Francisco and once even to Sacramento, where Sarah finally met the aunt she had been traveling to see all those years ago. The elderly woman was delighted to meet Grant and to see how well Sarah had done for herself. They spent more time with their grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about how grandmother Sarah and grandfather Grant had met. The children loved the story, always begging to hear it again, though Sarah and Grant edited out the more violent details for the younger ones. "Tell us about when Grandpa found Grandma," little Sarah would beg, curling up on Grant's lap. "Well," Grant would say, settling into his chair, "I was riding home one day when I saw something lying beside an overturned stagecoach. When I got closer, I realized it was a beautiful young woman who had been hurt. I knew right away that I had to help her. Because you loved her, the child would ask. Not yet, but I think my heart knew even then that she was special. So I took her to my ranch and I took care of her, and when she finally woke up, I asked her name. And she said Sarah. The little girl would finish triumphantly. That's right. She said Sarah, and from that moment on, my life changed forever. Sarah would watch these exchanges with a full heart, seeing their love story continue through the generations. Their grandchildren would grow up knowing that love could be found in the darkest moments, that kindness and courage could change lives, and that family was the most important thing in the world. When Grant and Sarah were both in their 60s, they made one more trip to that hilltop where he had proposed. They were older now, their hair gray, their faces lined with years of laughter and sun and life. But they still held hands as they walked, still kissed like young lovers, still looked at each other like they were the most precious thing in the world. You remember what I said when I proposed to you here? Grant asked as they sat on the hill, looking out at the view that had become so familiar over the years. Every word. You said you couldn't imagine spending your life with anyone else. You said I made you laugh and made you think and made you want to be better. You said you would spend the rest of your life showing me how much I meant to you. Sarah squeezed his hand. And you have, Grant. Every single day for 35 years, you have shown me how much you love me. It has been the easiest promise I ever made to keep. Because loving you, Sarah, has been the greatest joy of my life. You are still everything to me. You always will be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the ranch they had built together, the family they had raised, the life they had created from nothing but love and determination. Sarah thought about that girl who had been left for dead beside a stagecoach, who had thought her life was over. She could never have imagined this future, this beautiful, full, perfect life. I was so lucky that you found me that day, Sarah said softly. We were both lucky, Grant corrected. You gave me just as much as I gave you, Sarah. Maybe more. You gave me everything that matters. As darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, they made their way back down the hill to the ranch house. Lights glowed in the windows, and they could hear the sounds of their family inside, laughing and talking. Their children and grandchildren had gathered for dinner, as they did every week, and the house was full of life and love. Grant held the door open for Sarah, and as she stepped inside, surrounded by the warmth and noise and joy of their family, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Grateful for that day, Grant had ridden past the overturned stagecoach. Grateful that he had stopped, had helped, had asked her name. Grateful for every moment since, for every joy and challenge and triumph they had shared. She looked at Grant, standing beside her in the doorway, watching their family with the same love and pride she felt. He caught her looking and smiled, that smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. He held out his hand and she took it, and together they walked into the warmth of their home, into the life they had built, into the love that had sustained them for over 3 decades, and would sustain them for however many years they had left. This was their story. It had begun with tragedy and trauma, with a desperate moment when death seemed certain. But it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting, into a love story that had created a legacy. Sarah Brennan Thornton, the woman who had been left for dead, had not just survived. She had thrived. She had loved and been loved. She had built a family and a life that was rich beyond measure, and it had all started with a cowboy on a copper-colored horse, riding past at just the right moment to ask the most important question of his life. What is your name? That simple question had changed everything. Had started a conversation that had never really ended, a connection that had only grown stronger with time. From that moment of meeting to this moment now, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and the fruits of a life well lived together. Sarah and Grant had built something extraordinary. As the family sat down to dinner that evening, the table overflowing with food and the room filled with the chatter of multiple generations, Grant stood and raised his glass. The family quieted, looking at him with affection and attention. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. "To family, to love, to the woman who has been my partner in everything for 35 years. Sarah, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Here is to many more years together, and to the family we have built and the legacy we will leave behind." "To family," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Sarah met Grant's eyes across the table, and in that look passed all the love, all the gratitude, all the joy of their shared life. Here, in this moment, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured, Sarah knew she had found the happily ever after she had never thought possible. The little girl who had lost everything in a stagecoach robbery had found something infinitely better than what she had lost. She had found home. She had found purpose. She had found Grant. And together they had found forever. The years that followed were quieter but no less full of love. Grant and Sarah watched their grandchildren grow and their family continue to expand. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, mourned losses when they came, and cherished every ordinary moment of their life together. They grew old side by side, their love deepening with each passing year. When Grant finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by family and holding Sarah's hand, his last words were, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for the life we built together. I love you, Sarah, always." Sarah grieved deeply, but she was sustained by the love of her children and grandchildren, by the knowledge that she and Grant had had a love that most people only dreamed of. She lived another 5 years, spending that time sharing stories with her grandchildren, teaching them about love and kindness and the importance of family. She made sure they knew the story of how she and Grant had met, how love could be found in the most unexpected places, how one act of kindness could change everything. When Sarah finally joined Grant, passing peacefully in her sleep at 83, the ranch was filled with family. Thomas had taken over completely, running it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. Emma's training school was known throughout the state. Grace's children had given them more great-grandchildren. The family that Sarah and Grant had started with their love had grown into something that would last for generations. At Sarah's funeral, Thomas stood to speak about his mother. He told the story, as everyone had known he would, of how his parents had met. But he ended with something new, something he had found in his mother's papers after her death. "My mother wrote this shortly before she died," Thomas said, holding up a piece of paper in his mother's familiar handwriting. "She wanted us to know what she believed about love, about life, about the legacy she and my father left behind. She wrote, 'I was left for dead after a robbery, and a cowboy found me. He nursed me back to health and asked my name. From that simple question came a love story that lasted a lifetime.' To anyone who reads this in the future, remember that life can change in a moment. The darkest times can lead to the brightest blessings. Love can be found when you least expect it. And the greatest legacy you can leave is not wealth or fame, but a family built on love, respect, and devotion to each other. Grant gave me back my life, and I gave him my heart. Together we built something beautiful that will outlast us both. This is my wish for all of you, my children, grandchildren, and generations yet to come. Find your person, build your love, create your legacy. And never forget that every life is precious, every moment matters, and love conquers all." There was not a dry eye in the church. The family laid Sarah to rest beside Grant on that hilltop where he had proposed, where they had returned so many times over the years. A simple stone marked their graves, engraved with their names, their years, and a single line: "Together forever." The ranch continued to thrive, passing through generations of Thorntons, each one raised on the story of Sarah and Grant, of how their great-great-grandparents had found love in the aftermath of tragedy. The family never forgot the lessons Sarah and Grant had taught them, about kindness, about courage, about the power of love to transform lives. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the California sun was setting over the hills, casting everything in golden light, people swore they could see two figures sitting on that hilltop. An older couple, holding hands, looking out over the ranch they had built together. It was just a trick of the light, of course, shadows and imagination. But the family liked to think it was Grant and Sarah, still watching over the home they had created, still together, still in love. Their story had started with a question: "What is your name?" It had grown into a love that had lasted a lifetime and beyond, creating a legacy that would endure for generations. From tragedy came triumph. From near death came a life fully lived. From a chance meeting came a love story for the ages. Sarah Brennan and Grant Thornton, the woman who was left for dead and the cowboy who saved her, had found their forever in each other. And that forever continued in the family they had created, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the love story that was passed down through generations as proof that miracles could happen, that love could conquer all, that a single act of kindness could change the course of a life. They had found their happily ever after, and it was more beautiful than either of them could have ever imagined on that day when Grant rode up to an overturned stagecoach and found a dying woman in the dust. From that moment until their last breaths and beyond, Sarah and Grant had loved each other completely, building a life and a legacy that would never be forgotten. This was their story. A story of survival and salvation, of love and legacy, of two souls who found each other against all odds and chose to build something extraordinary together. And it all began with the simplest of questions, asked with the kindest of hearts: "What is your name?"